Sit here. Good morning to each of you. I'm Lee Hamilton. I'm the president of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Directors Forum with Michael Wilson, the Canadian Ambassador to the United States. Let me acknowledge Governor Jim Blanchard, I believe he is in the audience, and Paul Fraser from our Canada Institute Advisory Board. I also want to welcome Wilson Council member Oakley Brooks. The relationship between the United States and Canada is quite simply the most successful bilateral relationship between neighboring states in the world, perhaps in the history of the world. The links between our people are staggering. Over $1 billion a day in trade, close cooperation on security, with Canadian troops making a major contribution now in Afghanistan, and of course, incalculable cultural and personal connections. Yet the success of our relationship does not mean that it proceeds without strains. The challenge for Americans and Canadians is seeing that disagreements are settled agreeably, and that the areas where we disagree do not overwhelm the breadth of areas where we do agree. At the Wilson Center, we're committed to advancing a robust dialogue in this vital relationship. Under the able leadership of David Biet, our Canada Institute seeks to be one of the most prominent forums in the country for dialogue on U.S.-Canada relations among the private sector, academics, and the media, and of course the policymaker. We've also benefited from hosting a number of extremely able Canadian scholars here. Today, it's our honor to welcome the new Canadian Ambassador to the United States, Michael Wilson, a man who has approached the U.S.-Canada relationship for many years from a range of important public and private sector posts. He was first elected to the House of Commons in 1979. He then served as Canada's Minister of Finance from 1984 to 1991, at which point he became Minister of Industry, Science and Technology and Minister for International Trade. Ambassador Wilson has also enjoyed a highly successful career in investment banking. He served as Vice Chairman of RBC Dominion Securities, and in July 2001, he became Chairman of UBS Canada, overseeing all of its operations in Canada. He assumed his current post on March 13. We welcome him to Washington. He and I are friends from long standing, having participated in the parliamentary exchanges for a number of years, many years back. We look forward to working with him and his team at the embassy. His talk is entitled Old Friends, New Opportunities, the Importance of the Canadian-American Relationship. Ambassador Wilson, we welcome you to the center and we look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you very much for that Kind introduction, very kind introduction, Lee, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity to discuss the importance of the Canada-U.S. relationship. Now, I'm sure that you're wondering why. You've heard some of my background from Lee's introduction, why someone who was involved in the private sector and in government and having spent some very interesting times negotiating the free trade agreements between the United States and Canada. Why would someone with this sort of background jump back into public life? And to help answer this, I'd like to quote this center's inspiration, Woodrow Wilson, on what he deemed as life's purpose. You're not here merely to make a living. You're here in order to enable the world to live more amply, with greater vision, and with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You're here to enrich the world, and you impoverish yourself if you forget that errand. Now, I'd like to stand here and tell you that that was precisely what was going through my mind when the Prime Minister asked me to take on this responsibility. Now, I wish I could claim the wisdom of the other Wilson, that wisdom had rubbed off on me in recent years. But, however, when I read this quote, another saying went through my mind. That is, plagiarism is a great form of flattery. So we Wilsons have to stick together. Now, it's my privilege and honor to serve as ambassador to the United States. As Lee has said, it's a very important relationship. The United States is Canada's closest ally, its greatest friend, largest trading partner, bar none, and no country is more important to Canada and its people than the United States of America. Now, in my address today, I'm going to outline 4 key elements of the Canadian-American relationship: our shared heritage, how the relationship works at home in North America as well as abroad, our continuing economic integration, and I'm also going to discuss some facets of the Canadian government's agenda and hopefully have some time to take some questions from you. Now, no other neighbor nations in the world can claim the shared heritage that Canada and the United States have enjoyed in the last 140 plus years. Our shared history, respect and promotion of democratic principles and freedom, the rule of law and respect for human rights are pillars of commonality that bind us together in today's volatile world. The relationship impacts all of us on a daily basis, and sometimes we take that for granted. Our countries are united not just by the world's longest, safest, and unmilitarized border and the largest commercial relationship, but more importantly by family, kinship, and shared values. I have first-hand experience of family ties that reach across the border since both my mother and my wife's mother were born in the United States. And I'm not alone. I'm sure that all of us here today have relatives and friends on both sides of the border and can attest to the deep personal connections that shape and foster the Canada-U.S. relationship. These connections are the same ones that make our assistance to each other in times of need instinctive and automatic. Whatever the cause, be it hurricane, ice storm, forest fire, or terrorist attack, Canadians and Americans help each other immediately, generously, and without thought of recompense, because that's what good friends, neighbors, and family do. We witnessed this on 9/11 when Canadians opened their homes to thousands of stranded travelers, and more recently in the immediate response and outpouring of support in the wake of Hurricane Katrina that devastated New Orleans, the Gulf Coast, and Florida. In my opinion, one of the greatest annual exchanges, symbolizing our relationship and proud tradition of helping each other in times of need, is captured in the Christmas tree that the province of Nova Scotia sends to Boston to thank New Englanders for their help after the Halifax explosion nearly 100 years ago. This long-standing tradition captures the essence of what a friendship is meant to be. Now, I'd like to talk to you today about the Canadian-American relationship also in an international context. Provide some examples of how our two nations act in concert and share common vision. First and foremost, Canada is an active contributor and partner in the war on terror, particularly with our activities in Afghanistan. I'll outline our commitment and contribution in the Afghan theater shortly, but would like to take this time to inform you of other efforts that Canada and the United States share common vision and act in concert on, and let me elaborate on some of these. Canada is a leader in the global partnership against the spread of weapons and materials of mass destruction. This global partnership's purpose is to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to terrorists or those who support them by securing or destroying weapons-grade material in the former Soviet Union. Canada is contributing $1 billion over 10 years to this partnership, with over $250 million already dispersed. And both the United States and Russia have recognized Canada as one of the best at, quite literally, delivering the money and the goods. We're also working closely with the United States on the Proliferation Security Initiative, another program aimed at stopping the flow of weapons of mass destruction. At the International Atomic Energy Agency, Canada supports the United States in ensuring that nuclear energy is used only for peaceful purposes and supports the United States' efforts to secure strong action by the United Nations Security Council to resolve the Iran nuclear issue. This common approach with the United States and others not only helps our two nations attain important objectives, it also helps curb the political and economic volatility that threatens our collective livelihoods. In Africa, and in the wake of the recently signed Darfur Agreement, Canada immediately moved and increased financial support to the Sudan by $40 million. Half of this will be designated for urgent humanitarian needs, such as food, water, sanitation, basic health care, as well as the protection of displaced populations in Sudan and refugees in neighboring countries. Canada will work with key UN humanitarian agencies as well as international and Canadian NGOs, including the Red Cross movement, in ensuring that the people of Sudan can once again restore peace to a conflict that has gone on far too long. Closer to home, as savvy readers of continental and global affairs, you'll know that the business climate in much of Latin America has deteriorated in recent months. With the threat of resource nationalization possibly becoming a reality, Canada is not standing by. We're actively engaged in working with the United States and a variety of international partners and multilateral organizations. We're working with the Organization of American States to assist in governance and institution building, to demonstrate why free and open trade is mutually beneficial and important in today's interdependent global economy. Outside of the Western Hemisphere, as I mentioned before, our contribution to ensuring stability in Afghanistan is steadfast. Prime Minister Harper's first official visit outside of Canada was to Afghanistan to demonstrate our commitment to President Karzai and the Afghan people, as well as lend support to our 2,300 troops stationed there. Since his visit, Prime Minister Harper has extended Canada's mission with the support of Parliament, solidifying our commitment in Afghanistan to 2009. Canadians are very conscious of the impact of the terrorist attacks that took place on 9/11. And recognize that we cannot allow terrorists to find safe haven in Afghanistan. As Woodrow Wilson stated, the seed of revolution is repression, and Canada will continue to promote shared values abroad and stand in opposition against regimes that oppress and inhibit the development of equality, freedom, and democratic government. And that's why we are a key part of the 34-nation alliance there, why we have led NATO's ISAF force, and why we're there with 2,300 troops in Kandahar, and why Canada gives Afghanistan more development assistance than any other country in the world. Simply driving out the Taliban is not Canada's only mission. Canada is committed to rebuilding a stronger, more stable Afghanistan, not only to bring about regional and global stability, but also create viable opportunities for economic and institutional development so that peace can once again flourish in that country. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Peter MacKay, recently announced that the job won't be over until peace and security have been restored. Canada's total allocation to Afghanistan of development assistance through to 2011 is almost $1 billion. Our military contribution is similarly significant. Canadians are committed to this effort because the cause is just and vital to long-term regional and global security, because it's our pledge to the Afghan people, our friends, and our allies, and because Canada, in the words of our Prime Minister, does not cut and run. Now, while the human links between our two nations resonate immediately, it's also worth noting that these are supplemented by an intricate network of institutions and agreements that underpin the relationship. This includes NORAD, which was recently renewed, the Permanent Joint Board of Defense, the International Joint Commission, the North American Electric Reliability Council, and the Great Lakes Commission. The Open Skies Aviation Agreement is a further reflection of our integration. This removes all economic restrictions on air services to, from, and beyond each other's territory by airlines of both countries. And through initiatives such as the Container Security Initiative, the new Canadian Permanent Resident Cards, FAST, Nexus, and the Safe Third Country Agreement, and the Smart Border Declaration, our security has been enhanced while keeping our border open to legitimate commerce and travel. The recent budget that was passed by the Conservative government also reflects the importance of balancing security and trade. Since 9/11, and including over $1 billion in this budget, Canada has committed over $10 billion to enhancing border security and law enforcement. Now, this being said, it's important not to view the border only through the lens of security. We mustn't lose sight of our friendships, families, and business relationships. Canada is committed to securing and preserving this long-standing cultural, social, and economic relationship to ensure that it remains open and free to the flow of commerce and people. Now, this leads me to my next point on energy security. Against the backdrop of increasing global demand for precious energy resources, coupled with the threat of supply cuts and resource nationalization in the Middle East and Latin America, Americans can take comfort in the security of our vibrant energy relationship. Canada is by far the world's largest exporter of energy to the United States. We are the largest supplier to the United States of each of oil, natural gas, uranium, and electricity. Now, this is a surprise to many Americans who still believe that Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern nations are the source of most of their energy supplies. Oil sands production alone has now surpassed 1 million barrels a day, on its way to 2 million barrels a day by 2012, with already planned investments. And let me emphasize that this supply is safe, secure, and right next door. You need not have to worry of having to deal with a despot or an unstable regime to access that energy. New challenges are emerging and confronting our relationship, and it is my hope that together we can approach these issues together. Pandemics, the protection of our shared environment, and growing competition from rising economic powers are other challenges that face both our countries. To ensure the security and prosperity of our peoples, our governments, along with Mexico, have agreed to deepen our cooperation on these and other issues. In our increasingly integrated and interdependent world, our responses to threats and opportunities must likewise be coordinated and complementary. And that's why in Cancun, Prime Minister Harper and Presidents Bush and Fox committed our countries to working together on North American competitiveness, regulatory cooperation, emergency management, energy security, and smart, secure borders. This includes an endorsement to strengthen the Security and Prosperity Partnership, and we're doing just that. Last week saw the first meeting of the North American Competitiveness Council, composed of private sector representatives, meeting with Canada's Minister of Industry, Maxime Bernier, joining with Secretary of Commerce, Gutierrez, and Mexican Minister of Economy, Sergio Garcia de Alba, to advance our common economic interests. Canada is also contributing significantly to the economic security of the continent. From 1997 to 2005, Canada led the G7 in real GDP growth per capita and employment growth. In February 2006, our unemployment rate reached the lowest level in over 30 years, and the employment rate hovered near record highs. We've had 8 consecutive budget surpluses. Yes, I said surpluses, through 2004-2005. And the new government is committed to bringing forward fiscally responsible budgets. Our current account has been in surplus for 26 consecutive quarters. Our total government debt as a percent of GDP is down to 26%, lowest in the G7. And our net foreign debt is at the lowest level since 1945 at 12.5%. These robust economic fundamentals will allow the government to make tangible improvements that contribute to stronger families, safer communities, and a stronger country, and in turn, a stronger Canada-U.S. economic relationship. The foundation of this growth was the 1989 Free Trade Agreement, which pushed Canada's economy strongly into the 21st century. Canada and the United States now share the largest and most productive bilateral trading relationship in the world. Since the implementation of the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, two-way trade has tripled. In 2005, our bilateral trade was over $580 billion. That's almost $1.6 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border every single day. Canada represents 23.5% of America's exports and is a larger market for U.S. goods than all 25 countries of the European Union combined. Or put another way, Canada is the #1 foreign market for 38 U.S. states, and that trade supports over 5 million U.S. jobs. Now, I'm regularly asked since being appointed ambassador about the current state of the Canadian-American relationship at the top. I'm proud to say that Prime Minister Harper immediately reached out to President Bush after being elected with a minority government and made it a well-known priority of his government to repair the Canadian-American relationship. President Bush has strongly reciprocated. Prime Minister Harper believes, as I do, that our integrated economies dictate a necessity for our nations to continue to work together to find integrated solutions. Trade has been and will continue to be the cornerstone of prosperity for our nation's economies. Our integrated economies oblige us to ensure that security measures on our shared borders don't become an unnecessary impediment to the two-way flow of millions of people and billions of dollars in trade and investment. Canada does more trade with Home Depot than the United States does on an annual basis with the country of France. It's that simple. And while minor irritants seem to garner most of the headlines, it's refreshing to see that a renewal of discussion, cooperation, and the ability to find common ground is taking place between our two leaders. I'm happy to stand before you today and state that we're on the way to resolving the long-standing softwood lumber dispute. This dispute, as we all know, resonated on a very personal level for many Canadians, and it was through concerted negotiations and respectful dialogue that the current framework of an agreement has come about. Both Prime Minister Harper and President Bush made it a priority to negotiate and inject reason into the discussions. While work still has to be done to finalize the legal text of this agreement, I'm left with a great optimism in how the Canadian-U.S. relationship can work and has worked since my arrival in Washington. Now, with the emergence of China and India as major global players and an expanding European Union, it's time that we band together and resolve our issues so that we can face new economic challenges together rather than distracting ourselves away from the bigger picture. Now, following up on the productive Cancun meetings in March, Prime Minister Harper will be in Washington on July 6th for a working meeting with President Bush. The meeting will discuss some of the themes that I've outlined today, exploring areas where there are opportunities to deepen our bilateral ties and advance our shared global agenda. However, one initiative remains a concern, and a top priority for me is the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, WHTI. The WHTI is mandated by Congress to require that by January 1st, 2008, all Americans and Canadians alike must have a passport or equivalent documentation to enter the United States. Since this initiative was announced, it was welcoming to hear President Bush state that he's committed to implementing a program that is the least intrusive to the shared history and friendships that we enjoy, as well as the flow of commerce and people across our borders. With the requirement a year and a half away from coming into force, we do have some concerns. We have a narrow time frame to sort out some very fundamental issues. We're advocating for more time to assess, finalize, and publish the implementing rule, conduct meaningful economic impact assessments, identify and develop the appropriate technology, install readers and related infrastructure at our border crossings, conduct trial runs or pilot projects, and convince people to buy the new documents. The WHTI is an important element in the border security efforts conducted by both our countries. Cooperative and integrated activity in border management, police work, intelligence, and immigration must continue to be the dominant elements to ensure that security. Both Canada and the United States have been collaborating for years in these domains, particularly since 9/11. That was evident in the Toronto arrests about 2.5 weeks ago. The many positive comments from administration officials reflected their awareness and their understanding of the significance and the success of that cooperation. Having said that, I have to acknowledge that one of my early conclusions as ambassador is that little is known of this, and that has led to some serious misconceptions sometimes in Congress. As an example, 3 members of Congress have stated in the past few weeks that a number of the 9/11 terrorists came from Canada. This is false, as former Attorney General Ashcroft stated nearly 5 years ago. Now, I discussed these concerns with Lee Hamilton about 2 months ago, and out of that conversation, I decided that it was important for both of our countries to develop a better understanding of the degree of cooperation that does exist and the success that we've had. It's a good story, and I intend to tell it frequently. I've also asked senior Canadian officials in these areas to take this message to members of Congress so that these people will have a good sense of this as they deal with security issues. The first visits took place last week and were very useful in addressing some of these issues. However, this is and must be a long-term commitment. It reflects the importance of being a committed, reliable partner in security and to having this commitment in security acknowledged. We neither want to be harmed, nor do we want to be the source of any harm to our southern friends. We understand that the highest priority in the United States is security, and we're on the same page with you on that regard. But with approximately one-third of our GDP dependent on trade with the United States, like any prudent businessman, Canadians also want to protect their livelihoods and our fruitful trading relationships with your country. The recent experience in Toronto is a reminder to both our countries. It clearly demonstrates the importance of solid intelligence gathering and enforcement coordination. This was a homegrown operation, the most difficult to track down. We witnessed federal, provincial, and local authorities on both sides of the border working hand in glove on a major operation of critical importance, preventing dangerous persons from threatening our way of life. WHTI must be viewed in a broader concept. In addressing the mandate of Congress, it's vital that we continue to engage and coordinate with the United States every step of the way. With almost $1.6 billion worth of goods and services and 300,000 people passing across our borders every day, it's imperative that our interests not be impeded by confusion and congestion at the border. Many of your northern border representatives and senators have brought like-minded concerns forward to the House and Senate floor. We're confident that our officials who are working together through this process will put forward the best solutions, taking the long-standing friendship and economic relationships into account. Border security is and will continue to be best attained by diligent, comprehensive intelligence and policing, and this is accomplished through the continuation of strong, effective cooperation between our two nations. Now, let me conclude my remarks with an optimistic outlook for the future of our great relationship. The Canada-U.S. relationship has many facets encompassing considerable multilateral cooperation, extensive bilateral initiatives, and the occasional difference in opinion. The relationship is at the same time complex, broad, and deep, and Prime Minister Harper is committed to make it even stronger. We must celebrate our successes and respect each other's different points of view, as much as we constructively engage each other on issues of individual national importance. We must continue to work together to resolve our disputes, which are inevitable in such a diverse relationship. Our shared heritage, our shared outlook, and shared principles and accomplishments necessitate this. We're a continent of friends and family, rich in resources, ideas, and initiative, partners abroad and at home. Geography has made us neighbors, and history has indeed made us the best of friends and the most important of allies. Together we can define our future, and as Ambassador to the United States, I'll continue to ensure that this remarkable and unique relationship between our countries is never taken for granted, and that it remains a model of dynamic, respectful, productive, and helpful partnership for the world to follow. Now, one brief commercial announcement before I take some questions. I want to take this time to inform you of a terrific set of events to kick off next week here in Washington. Alberta Week is happening from June 26th to 30th, and it encompasses a wide array of economic and cultural events. This includes participation in the Smithsonian's Folklife Festival celebrations on June 30th, with concerts slated to take place in the mall, as well as a terrific pancake breakfast, and I may even be flipping some of these, at the Embassy on July 1st, which is Canada Day, and that'll be hosted by the Calgary Stampede. Now, wrapping up the Canada Day festivities will be a great evening concert on the mall, which is free and open to the public, and we hope to see many of you there. Thank you very much for your time and interest, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, you may stay at the podium or sit at the desk as you prefer. We have microphones on both sides, and I'll recognize people will go till about 12 o'clock or maybe a few minutes before we'll begin here.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I was very impressed with your comments about the WHTI. There's a corollary initiative coming out of the United States called the Strategic Border Initiative, as it alludes to between the established ports of entry, where the United States government is going to employ such things as in-ground sensors, towers with cameras, UAVs, and other defense-related assets. To what extent has this initiative been a cooperative venture with the government of Canada?
I don't recognize that particular name, so I'm going to answer the question in a broader sense. We do have a considerable amount of cooperation. Let me give you an example on container traffic. We have peoples in, I think it's 23 different countries around the world that are reviewing potential container traffic to North America and identifying traffic that might be sensitive, might be a problem, and trying to deal with as much of that on other ports in those other ports. We have people in Canadians have people in Seattle and Boston, I think it is, and Americans are in our three ports of Vancouver, Montreal, and Halifax. So again, checking container traffic as it comes in. And then there's a final element that you might be interested in. Any container traffic that comes through a Canadian port and by train into the United States is 100% checked by VACUS, gamma ray surveillance, and that can pick up people and inappropriate goods within a rail car, a container car. So that gives you some sense of the amount of cooperation, but the extent of the security and basically the seriousness with which we take this security concern that affects both our countries.
Okay, question here.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You mentioned resolution of a long-standing issue on softwood lumber, yet it's not quite final, as I understand, hasn't been quite approved in total by Parliament. Is there a possibility that portions of this agreement could be renegotiated or tweaked?
We have a basic text, the text that was agreed on April 27th, which is guiding us as we go through the final legal text, and we're holding very purely to that heads of agreement. That it's pretty transparent and pretty clear, but as you get into the detail in a pretty complex industry, there are some difficulties which we are trying to work out now. But I think you'll see that the deviation from that basic text will be very, very marginal.
Okay, additional questions for the ambassador? Here's one right here.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. There's another deadline, January 1st, 2007, for air and sea traffic into Canada. How prepared do you think the Canadian people are for that?
I think that this is of less concern for us because usually most people who are traveling by air will have a passport, and likewise with sea. I think the control over sea traffic is more directed at the Caribbean, because the impact this will be felt by Canada, the Caribbean, and Mexico, more in the context of Americans returning from Mexico and not wanting to go through the additional expense of having a card to get back into their own country. So our focus would be primarily on the air side, and I think people, as I said, are used to traveling with a passport, by and large through on airlines. So while there will be some elements of concern there, I don't think that will be as serious as the land concern, as the concerns we have on the land crossings.
Okay, and one more quick thing. January 1st, 2008, there's been a lot of concern about, on the United States side, about pass cards and various things like that. What is the Canadian government doing in regards to getting that kind of documentation on that, if anything's going on that side? And will you be prepared for that deadline, for that to pass with the WHTI?
It's a very good point. We, at this point, have a working group that the two governments have put together that is following through the series of things that I outlined in my earlier remarks. So we're trying to stay totally abreast with what the U.S. requirements are and seeing whether that has any implications for us in Canada. Obviously, we need to watch this very closely because of the amount of Canadians going south for whether it's travel, whether it's on business, vacation, whatever. I might just give you one little statistic to underline the reasons why we are so concerned about the land border. The Detroit-Windsor crossing has more two-way trade in that one single crossing between Canada and the United States than the United States has with their total trade with Japan. So it's a huge challenge that we have. We're watching it very closely, and if that requires a Canadian response, I think that we'll know far enough in advance to be able to prepare for that.
Okay, additional questions here. And then there will be one back there. Catherine.
You mentioned the shared heritage and mentioned human rights in the mix between Canada and the U.S. Do you plan on using your privileged relationship to encourage the U.S. government to live up to its human rights commitments? I'm thinking about, in particular with the war on terror, that so damages its image abroad and, by implication, Canada's image, which closely allies itself with the U.S.
These are matters which we have discussed. The matter of the detainees in Guantanamo Bay has been a matter of discussion between the two countries, and there would be other instances where we have views. This is something that consecutive governments have felt very strongly about, and in a number of instances our views are exactly the same as the United States government. So there may be differences. We'll have those differences out. We'll discuss them openly. I should say to you, just to give you an example of the style of the new Prime Minister, after their first one-on-one meeting at Cancun, the President came out of the meeting and he said, well, your Prime Minister is very direct. There's no misunderstanding what his point of view is, and I like that because that allows me to respond. Having it too nuanced is more difficult to respond to, so I don't think you need worry about having a Prime Minister in Canada who has views and is prepared to state them strongly and clearly.
Okay, question here.
Mr. Ambassador, as I understand the WHTI provision, doesn't not necessarily require a passport for entry into the United States, but rather a secure document. One, my question is, what constitutes a secure document, and two, what kind of secure document would Canada like to see implemented?
Well, the legislation originally provided for passport or secure document, and early on, I forget what the timing of it was. Earlier on, the Americans stated that they'd move off the passport because of the cost and difficulty of more complexity in attaining a passport. So we're left with the second part of the legislation, which talks about secure documentation or a combination. One of the first things that we hope to hear from the United States is what that means. Have they made decisions on what the documentation might be and what the standards to comply with in that documentation? That then will give us a much clearer sense of direction as to what is needed to get from here to January 1st, 2008, and whether we're in a position to see the requirements met. And as I indicated in my earlier remarks, there's quite a bit to be done. But there is work underway, and it's been indicated from time to time that we will be getting answers to some of these questions, and hopefully sooner rather than later, because of the problems of potential congestion.
Okay, further questions? Mr. Ambassador, we've been delighted to have you here. We thank you for your eloquent statement. I thought passages of that speech were as good as I've heard with regard to the U.S.-Canada relationship. We're delighted to have you here, and we look forward to a long tenure for you here and an enhancement of U.S.-Canadian relationships under your leadership. Let us applaud him, would you please?